This is Dr. Fox. Thank you all for your continued support for CRPN and CRPN Central. For more information about our mission, please contact us today at info@crpaynet.com for details.
Hello, I'm interested in joining your current clinical trial. I filled out the information on your website and I've tried calling you for the past 2 weeks without a follow-up call. Am I doing something wrong?
Have you filled out our questionnaire?
Yes, I just said that.
Have you received an email or a phone call from our system?
Well, no, I just told you.
That's our process and we have to follow it. If you are qualified, we will call you.
Well, what if I'm not qualified?
That's our process.
I see. I just received a life-changing diagnosis. I'm scared. I'm looking for help. And it feels like my participation in this trial is far more important to me than it is to...
That's our process. Thank you. Goodbye.
Patients, whether they are the ones looking at us or those who will receive our care in a decade, are our professional purpose, our passions, and our mission. They are not just a number, a dollar sign, or a leverage to grow your business. And the sacrifices they make, despite the personal health challenges they face, make them by far our industry's greatest heroes. And yet, testimonies just like this one continue to be the norm. Robotic and uncaring site processes who are far more concerned with enrollment numbers and efficiency over the sole reason we are in this industry. Sites. If you're good at what you do, the market will reward you. And being good at what you do is insisting on empathy for your trial participants and their needs. If you are laser focused on your margins and efficient processes over trial participant satisfaction, you are only delaying research advancement with frustrated participants, limited enrollment, and withdrawn consents. Sponsors, if you're having a difficult time enrolling in your trials, pay very close attention to how your awarded sites treat potential trial participants. If you continue to award trials to uncaring, robotic, and unproductive sites, they will only continue these forms of patient interactions. They'll fail to deliver the data that you need, and, of course, continue to take your money for work not performed. Welcome to CRPN Central, the official podcast of the Clinical Research Payment Network. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Fox. CRPN Central discusses the real issues with our clinical research industry to explore and identify mutually beneficial solutions for all of our stakeholders. We continually encounter enrollment challenges in our clinical trials, and we spend billions of dollars trying to recruit patients. And yet, with all of these expanded resources, we continually run into the same enrollment dilemmas, all while patients throughout our community are interested, willing, and looking to enroll in clinical research. How can we create positive patient outreach experiences to enhance study enrollment and improve the overall experiences of our clinical trial participants? Today, we will discuss participant experiences throughout the clinical research process, defined as the observations of facts and/or events acquired by experience over selected time periods of individuals who voluntarily participate in research studies that assess new tests, diagnostics, and/or interventional treatments for human health outcomes. First, we will speak with an industry leader who has recently experienced the clinical trial participant journey with a loved one. Then, we will speak with one of our industry's finest, who has dedicated his career to positive and productive trial participant identification and enrollment. To maintain valid comparisons, both interviews will use the same questions, and my guest did not know the questions before the interviews. We will reconvene after the interviews to compare guest answers and perhaps identify ways to improve trial participant experiences and enhance trial enrollment in the industry. Our first guest has not only dedicated her professional career to the well-being and improvement of our trial participants and sites, but she has also just recently experienced the patient journey with a close loved one. Bree Burks is the Vice President of Strategy and Site Solutions at Viva Systems, and as a nurse, has spent over a decade in the industry to help improve clinical research and research processes. Bree is an absolute inspiration, and I'm so very thankful she's taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me, Bree Burks. Miss Bree Burks, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time, so I'm super excited.
Would you be willing to introduce yourself?
I'm Bree Burks. I currently work in a technology role and a strategy role at Viva, but I made my way into clinical research, as most people have, through just sort of stumbling upon the industry. And I'm a nurse by background and worked in the ICU and several ICUs for a while, got into clinical trials within academic medical centers, ran a clinical trials office at an academic medical center, got frustrated with the lack of good technology options, ended up in technology, had an opportunity to see the industry from several different viewpoints. So that'll be what I'm kind of bringing to the table today.
I've listened to you on other podcasts, and what you've done for this industry is absolutely inspirational for our sites.
Thank you. I will say I'm very proud to be part of the company that I am and just how they advocate for sites.
Today, we're going to talk about the patient experience, specifically the trials, tribulations, and maybe even some of the positivities that our patients may go through. I know that in social media, you were very open about a recent patient experience that you had just encountered. Would you be willing to give a brief background on this?
Yeah, I feel like I almost owe more background on it. I don't know how you all have the time to keep up with social media. There was such an outpouring when I started sharing my story of a family member. It's actually my mother-in-law. There was such an outpouring of support that I couldn't keep up with it. I found myself supporting her. She just was sort of out of the blue diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. That was such a journey to go on, trying to support her and feeling like I really understood, especially from the patient and site perspective, how to connect her with a clinical trial for care. And she was very excited about the opportunity to give back in a bigger way. I did not have to plant that seed with her. That was just something I wanted to support her through. And I really found myself jumping through a lot of hoops. My eyes were definitely opened during that experience with her recently to how, I would say, even more complicated it has been in the past few years since I was directly supporting patients like her through trials to access trials, even when they know the trials that they're interested in.
From the site's perspective, I've seen numerous examples, not only personally, but also throughout the industry, from what I've heard, of sites who are literally the front line for their patients.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard those stories, but the sites that spent an entire day, every coordinator, all hands on deck, trying to get a patient randomized on the last day of enrollment.
Yes.
Or the times when patients' rights were being revoked through ICFs or through certain policies that just weren't right. Sites would stand up and they would say, no, we're not going to do this. This is for our patient. Big shout out to all the sites out there who have taken that stand for their patient, even at the cost of your well-being.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions.
Okay.
And I've already asked these questions to another individual. And we're going to see how you responded to the questions versus how they responded to the questions. And then maybe see if we can see some similarities or some differences or maybe even some alignments throughout the industry to understand this patient experience.
Okay, let's do it.
Can you walk me through your experiences or the experiences of your loved one as a trial participant from start to finish?
Yeah, happy to. Just getting the right diagnosis for my mother-in-law was really difficult. Where she lives, there's not a lot of clinical trial access there. There's no academic medical centers close to her. There's not a lot of clinical research sites there. She also struggled to get a biopsy to actually confirm her cancer diagnosis. That was really difficult. I actually had to pull strings from healthcare providers that I knew here in Nashville, where I'm located, to get a biopsy for her. We were weeks into getting her a biopsy. And then when we had a diagnosis, the oncologist that she's used for years, who was wonderful, has never participated in a clinical trial, which is so challenging. And there's no clinical trials around her. We essentially had to take the perspective of, if she's going to participate in a clinical trial, she is not in the right place at the right time. We are going to have to locate where are trial sites and is she actually willing to change healthcare providers, which is a tricky thing when you've had an established oncologist and have been cancer free for years and years with really nobody telling you that there's any chance of recurrence. Her chance of recurrence was noted to be incredibly minimal. With that in mind, we started looking through clinicaltrials.gov and other platforms that are out there that can really slice and dice into inclusion exclusion criteria. I also found some really cool free advocacy groups for patients. They actually took her medical records and aligned them with AI technology, and they scraped for trials too. So I was looking for trials. I had other people I knew looking for trials. We were looking across multiple platforms. That was a challenge in itself. But from there, the thing that shocked me the most was once we really identified the one or two trials that we were really interested in, it took me from identifying that to actually talking to someone at a site that could actually give us a consent form and consider enrolling her almost 2 weeks. That was shocking.
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
You tried for 2 weeks, right?
We tried relentlessly for 2 weeks. It was eye-opening for me to see that clinicaltrials.gov being the source today of really who's who doing a lot of these trials. These big, larger phase 3, phase 4 trials, if you look on clinicaltrials.gov, they are sometimes not even stating the actual site name. They're stating the city, much less actual real contact information for a PI or someone that could screen that would support the PI. That contact information is really a very real missing link right now. Once we found cities in the Nashville area, there were multiple sites that were participating, but I couldn't determine who they were. It just said Nashville. And the sponsor vendors that the sponsor had selected couldn't give me contact information either and made me go through Word documents and multiple steps. And it took actually LinkedIn for someone to tag a PI and for me to actually understand who at which site I could talk to for her. Unfortunately, once that happened and I actually contacted the site directly with a real phone number, that site runs thousands of trials. To be able to be screened for one specific study, there was no process for that. They kind of told me, you can get in the queue and it'll take you about a week and a half to get someone assigned and to get screened for a particular trial. At this point, we're almost 3 weeks in from her diagnosis, and she has a tumor that is starting to collapse her trachea and she cannot breathe. So she is telling me, is it really worth me being in this trial? Because I need immediate treatment. I can start chemo now, shrink this tumor down, or I can sit here and wait with sort of an unknown amount of time of when I'm going to be even screened and giving a consent, which doesn't mean that she's enrolled yet because of all of the imaging that then has to be done to confirm her and the core lab that then has to confirm her. And they wanted her to be re-biopsied, all of this stuff. So by the time she actually got enrolled and got treatment, we were over a month out from her diagnosis, and she was struggling and on oxygen 100% of the time at that point. Honestly, I don't even know if personally I would have allowed myself to go through that just for sake of being enrolled in a trial.
You're suffering because of a very inefficient process strictly for communication purposes. I am from rural Midwest. Everyone knows in my hometown that I'm part of research, and about twice a year I get a phone call from someone. We got this nasty diagnosis. Will you help us? And you take the clinicaltrials.gov route, try to get them connected, and then you say, well, you got a trial, but it's in Massachusetts. That's where you're going to have to go. And they say, well, I can't afford that.
Right.
6 months later, they're dead. So there was a trial that was available. It wasn't within their geographic region, and there's no way they could have done it. The rural struggle in research because of the inaccessibility, not necessarily the lack of interest, is a really big thing. The other part about your story that was just so inspirational was literally all hands on deck, help this person. There's venues out there for our patients. You were fortunate. You kind of knew the process, but there's a patient that doesn't have an outlet into research. You have no idea what you're doing.
Right now, I think for patients, they truly have to be at the right place at the right time to be able to be enrolled in trials. And tell me how that is equitable. This is healthcare. Everyone should be able to access it. My mother-in-law is having to cross state lines to participate in the closest site to her right now for this trial.
I'm an advocate for healthcare integration. If anyone wants an entire podcast on healthcare integration, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm so glad she's had having the opportunity to be a part of a trial. How's she doing?
She's doing okay. She's had some adverse events. She's had some clots in her lungs that have come up, and that was kind of nasty. She's had to be hospitalized a couple of times for that. She's still on oxygen 24/7 right now, but she is finally starting to feel better, which is great.
Good.
We are looking forward to getting imaging for her soon to hope that a lot of the cancer has now shrunk back now that she's being treated. We still don't know. She's in a randomized double-blind trial. We have no idea if she's getting the next generation of one of her treatment medications or she's just getting the current standard. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with my family about, is this really worth it? We don't even know if she's getting the drug.
All while you're putting her life on the line.
Right. I have sat in so many talks about how unethical the placebo arm is. And of course you sit there and go, absolutely right. It is. And you feel passion to do something. It's hard to know, well, what can I do? But when it's somebody close to you and your family that you love going through it, it just takes that to a whole nother level of watching what she's had to go through to participate in this study and not even knowing if she's actually getting the investigational product or not. And the critical link for her is her research nurse. She has that person's cell phone, and her research nurse is advocating for her because she's crossing state lines. She's had insurance issues. She's gotten all types of things authorized for her. Her nurse has advocated to her back to the sponsor to help cover things that weren't initially planned to be covered, travel, that type of thing. And so you take that research nurse out of the equation, or that research coordinator, I feel very confident she would not be participating in this trial right now.
So that opens up a whole other arm of the challenges that our patients have to face. Even once they're in the trial, now they have all kinds of things that they have to worry about. And once again, it's that clinical site representative, that research nurse, that's helping them to get through the entire thing, probably above and beyond the data that they're collecting.
Oh, absolutely. They are buddies now, texting and how are you? And she feels this sense of commitment now to her research nurse, which that also scares me. Like, what if her research nurse leaves? Because we know how difficult it is to be in the trenches of a site.
What do you think are the challenges that participants are experiencing right now when they're part of research?
Because we have not truly integrated research with care, they are having to pick up new healthcare providers. And that is, a lot to take on when you're dealing with a major diagnosis. Watching her, again, cross state lines to do things like complete a paper consent form has been really challenging for me. Watching her have to have a separate phone that dies to put her electronic patient reported outcomes in.
This is the Bree Burks who joined the industry for technology, who now has to watch this happen with patients, right?
And I have a picture, I'll have to send it to you. Her sweet research nurse that stapled together and handmade a schedule of events of all of her cycles of all of her drugs and put it in a folder for her with her name on it. I mean, she is literally living through stapled together 35 pages in a folder to understand what the next 2 years of her life looks like and all of the different visits she's going to have scheduled and what's going to happen. They're sitting in a folder, and that is excruciating to me. A lot of what's happening could be done virtually for her. She is not able to take electronic copies or go somewhere and have a really good modern consumer-like experience to understand the data that's being collected on her, the requirements for the visits that she's going to have. She is going back into the dark ages with this folder that she has. That's been really hard, watching her have the frustration of the inefficiencies. She still works full time and she has an hourly job, having to help her navigate conversations with her workplace around this to say, I don't have the opportunity to work from home. Can you make accommodations for me so that I can participate in this trial? I feel like everything that I've been fighting for has come back around, and she is dealing with all of the things that I were more hopeful that we've gotten to a better place at. And her specific experience, so much is still lacking.
Even we as a society still kind of view research as that only for really sick people, happens on lab rats kind of a mentality. Workplaces, they accommodate for jury duty or maternity leave. When it comes to a clinical trial, it hit mainstream for COVID, but nobody has COVID anymore. Why are we still doing research? That's a challenge that it seems like patients have to take a lot of sacrifice beyond just going to a trial visit.
Yeah, and no one is celebrating that sacrifice that she's had to go through in society. To your point, she has to be her own advocate and champion, and I'm here trying to tell her what you're doing matters. What you're doing is helping other people. It is really like a very quiet, lonely sacrifice that I feel like she's making, and I wish that we could change that.
To all of the patients out there who are currently acting as participants in our trials, despite your healthcare challenges, I really appreciate everything that you do to help future generations to come. You are appreciated. What do you think we're doing right in the industry as far as our patients go?
We are loving our patients. People in this industry are empathetic and they care and they are mission driven. And I see that on all sides of the industry. That is something that we are doing really, really well. When you break down the difficult processes that we have and now all the different vendors that are involved and the complexities of what it takes to pull off these global trials that we participate in, the people really, really care and they want to get it right. And so I have a lot of hope that things are going to get better just because of the way that the people in our industry, again, on all sides, truly, truly care. And for my mother-in-law specifically, the care that she has gotten from her new PI and from her research nurse and from everybody that's part of her new clinical team to participate in this trial has been above and beyond. And she's very grateful for that.
Sites, sponsors, and I've even talked to some of the CROs. They're there because they want to make research better. They want to access. We all have the same objective, but at the same time, we all have our own opinions on how to accomplish those objectives. There are obviously patients who need help. It took you a long time to get your mother-in-law the help that she needed. But then we've got sponsors that are saying, we can't get enough patients. It takes us way too long to enroll.
Right.
This is ridiculous. There's this disconnect between supply and demand on patients that need care versus sponsors that need patients or participants. Why do you think that is?
I think because clinical trials are too complicated to run at the site level. If I could have gone to my mother-in-law's standard oncologist and said, running this trial is going to be easy. It's going to be easy for your staff to understand. It's not going to take you that much time. It's going to feel pretty routine compared to what you do in the day-to-day. You're not going to have to go into all these separate systems and put all this separate information and do all these unique things with insurance and have all these visits of people looking over your shoulder at your hospital. If we truly could more seamlessly integrate it with care and physicians could just offer it as another option as they do the other options that they already have on the table, I don't think we would have the supply and demand problem. We need physicians running trials. We have got to figure out how to break down these complexities. And I will say, I was on a call within the last month with one of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies in the world, leadership at that pharma company. And you know what they said? They said, we have to figure out how to dovetail to work into the way a site works. How can you help us with that? And I literally almost cried.
Yeah.
So I think things are changing where sponsors are really trying to understand, because it's going to take them thinking about how do we integrate and hook into the health system instead of make our own standalone processes. And technology will be critical, and we are going to have to start working in more standard ways. And we can do that as an industry. We have to stop thinking that every single site, I mean, hopefully this is not going to be too controversial, and every single person is a super special snowflake. We have to start thinking of ways to optimize the work that we do and thinking of ways to standardize this work so that more physicians can participate. I think that's going to be what the key is.
We need to talk about healthcare integration again. You're spot on. There's no point in reinventing the wheel when we have an entire junkyard of tires. It's stupid. We need to all come together, focus on our specialties, make things far less complex, understand that not every physician wants to be a PI, but at the same time, every physician should offer trials to their patients, and find that as a balance in healthcare integration. Research doesn't have to be that mysterious behind a curtain thing. It can be a part of our everyday life, so that going back to society and society acceptance, people are going to say, okay, you're part of a trial. Okay, that's just like saying I'm going to surgery. There's nothing mysterious or weird or desperate about it.
Right. How long does it take for you to get on your phone and figure out where you can go if you want to get a flu diagnosis? You could figure that out, where you could go, the hours of operation, the diagnostic tests they offer, the physicians that are there. You compare that to how long it would take you to figure out how to find a trial offering some sort of more novel flu vaccine. Good luck. A huge problem too is until we get this integrated in, we are just using completely separate channels to surface clinical trials and clinical trial activity for patients. In order to try to end on a more hopeful note, I do feel like all of our mindsets are right. The challenges that sites are having, sponsors are listening, and it's not an immediate instant fix. And the opportunities for them to come together, how much activity your podcasts are getting and everyone else that's out there. I feel like the waves of change are coming, but we all have to know that this isn't going to be an overnight fix.
No, this is a long-term fix.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long-term and permanent fix.
Yeah.
And it's going to take time and a lot of support.
Yeah.
Bree, if I were to hand you the microphone and I just said, what would you like to tell the audience about patient participation and experience in clinical research? What would you tell them?
Coming from my most recent experience, I would say, let yourself sit in that person's shoes like it's a family member. Not the whole time, because that gets hard. I got great advice when I became a new nurse. You're going to go into this room, into the ICU, and this is going to be really hard, but your role is to figure out how to advocate for this patient and meet all of their clinical needs and give them excellent care. But what you need to do first to really assess the situation is put yourselves in their shoes, put yourselves in the shoes of their family members. What if that was your mother? What if that was your son? And let yourself really feel those emotions so that you can be a better advocate. It's really difficult when you're doing patient care through clinical trials day in and day out because it is a job. However, I just want to encourage people that are dealing directly with patients, put yourself in their shoes, let that wash over you and inspire you to really treat them like a family member and think about how personal that this is for them. And I think that will help you be a better advocate for that patient.
And sometimes you don't realize the stresses until you live it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say you put yourself in their shoes, but sometimes you have to get forced into those shoes to stay in them for long enough to get it.
I did, to have my eyes opened even more. I was very sensitive to patients, but this has definitely taken it to another level. And I feel like if we all continue to put patients at the center that way, that's how we're going to make the most progress the most quickly.
Bree, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central. An excellent interview, and I look forward to sharing this with the audience.
Thanks, Dr. Fox. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Sounds great.
Bye. Our next guest is by far one of the industry's most memorable, creative, and dedicated patient recruitment advocates of our time. Steve Wimmer is the Vice President of Partnerships at One in Health, an organization dedicated to efficiently identifying and communicating with potential trial participants for accurate and successful trial enrollment. Steve's social media presence, professional demeanor, and personal experience as a clinical trial participant are all informative and inspirational, and I'm so thankful he has taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me, Steve Wimmer. Mr. Steve Wimmer, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Absolutely stoked to be here. Thanks.
Could you give the audience a brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships at One in Health. We're a patient recruitment company. We work primarily with sponsors or CROs on centralized campaigns to use digital ads and refer folks into clinical studies. My background is pretty wide ranging. I spent my first 10 years out of college in full-time ministry, did some classroom education, and then prior to One in Health, I was doing e-commerce, so direct-to-consumer product marketing, and that's kind of the overlap with where we're at with One in Health. It's just using the internet to kind of get people to do things. I have been a participant in a couple trials. When I came into the industry, I was just like, I need to understand what's going on, and because I am so interested in study ads, I always click them, and so I get served a bunch on my own social media. And I ended up just saying, what if I just go all the way through and join one? So I've had the patient experience a couple times in addition to kind of seeing it from the 30,000 foot view of a vendor in the industry.
What you do and how you engage on social media is absolute genius. To capture the industry, the stories that you tell, it's literal brand development, not only for you, but also for One in Health. And you do an amazing job.
Well, part of my background was classroom education. Like I really like taking concepts and making them applicable, taking kind of the theoretical and putting handles on it so that it can actually do something. And I feel like at least with respect to the ads and the way people are trying to communicate trials online, I have a point of view and I'm happy to share it.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and those questions are going to be asked to another individual. We're going to see how you respond, and then we're going to compare your answers to maybe look at similarities, differences, some kind of an alignment so that we can try to identify potential solutions.
And the person who gets the most points is still getting the cruise?
Exactly.
Right on.
So today's topic is that patient experience, specifically the patient experience from that very first social media message on marketing all the way through the end of the trial.
Sure. I can only speak to my experience. As a patient, I have some experience. And then from a professional standpoint, we really try to stay in our lane. Our lane is using the internet to get people interested in studies. We typically will connect them to sites, and then that is our adieu. And they're in the care of the sites after that. We don't have a lot of feedback professionally from what happens once someone gets to a site and consents, but I'm happy to chime in with what I think is true.
From your experience and your perspective as a professional and as a patient, could you walk me through your experience as a trial participant from start to finish?
For me, my experience was I saw an ad online and it said exactly something that I was interested in. One was the COVID study back at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, yeah, I'm in all the way. And then another one was for back pain. My back is made of paper mache. And I was like, it would be cool to be able to pick something up off the ground one of these days. I saw it. I clicked through. It's a very standard process that a lot of people know at this point. You fill out a pre-screener and then you get called. I got a call. I went through some of the IE on the phone. They said, sounds like you're a good fit. We scheduled a time to come in, and I went in and did the screening and consented. I had some industry knowledge, so I was like reading the consent as if I knew what all the words meant, but really I was just signing my name at the bottom of the page. All my experience has been really good as a patient. The people there have been professional. They've been really nice. They've explained what to expect. That's a big thing for me, is making sure that people know what the next step is and they're not surprised. The only thing that I think was probably maybe an outage for me was the back pain study. Once I was done, that was it. I've never had any communication with them since then. It would have been cool to understand, did they hit their endpoint? Did they miss it? Did the study get filled? Did it ever conclude? That kind of vanished into oblivion, and I have no idea. With the Pfizer study, obviously, they were like, hey, by the way, you were vaccinated against COVID. I'm not surprised. I never got it. That was kind of my experience. It was just clicking an ad on the internet, and then within like a week, I was in a clinical research site. From my perspective, that's not uncommon for something high prevalence or maybe low stakes. The type of lifestyle condition that people are mostly used to living with and typically don't think, oh, they're doing clinical research on this. They've been diagnosed for 5 years and there's a standard of care. And so they don't think of their condition as something that's being actively studied. That's kind of a lot of where the patient recruitment that we do deals with. When you move over into something like rare disease or oncology, where the stakes are really high and the patients are very aware every second of the day that they're living with something, and they are aware that research is an option for them, I think the journey gets a little bit different, and they're having more awareness of what their options are, and they're also listening to different voices. If you're coming into a study for moderate atopic dermatitis, you're not going to call your doctor or make a consultation before you join the trial. Most people, they're just going to click the button, sign up, and go to the site. It's worth noting that there's probably at least two really big buckets where some people will just self-serve and go all the way through, and then some stuff is a more complex and they're relying on more sources of information than just, oh, I saw this thing on Pinterest.
Almost like not all trial enrollments are equal based off of their need.
1,000%. You have to remember there's some different approaches, and some stuff will not make sense in some contexts.
I've heard so many wonderful things about One in Health. One in Health has rescued our trial. One in Health has done these amazing things. As a vendor, have you seen or heard from any participants who may have expressed challenges?
One thing that a lot of folks are not considering is, for me as a marketer, just as a straight up, we're doing this, it is a bit of a numbers game. So we see X amount of clicks and X percentage of submissions, and we get to think about that. On the other end of every number in the funnel is a person, probably holding a cell phone, hoping that this can provide some alternative because they're seeking a solution. One thing that I think people feel upset by is when they don't qualify for a study. They often don't know why, and that's usually the end of the road. If you ever submit your information information on one of these landing pages, generally what you will see is if you don't qualify, thanks for your interest, you don't qualify. And that's the end of the road for them. And I think we do a bit of a disservice in not referring them out. And I understand if I'm a sponsor, I'm actually hurting my business prospects if I say, you can't be in this study, but let me send you to my competitor. Because we are kind of not spoken for in that sense, what we'll do is we have a partnership with the Mighty, which is an online patient community. We'll generally find some content there. And if someone doesn't qualify, we'll have their link out and say, like, here's some resources about your condition. If you want to find a community online, you can go here. And then we'll also link out to a clinical trial search engine. I usually link people to withpower.com, which is a search engine like any other, but I think in terms of usability and kind of interface, it's a little bit better. We'll have on our thank you page, you can either go to the Mighty and find other patients like you, or you can go and kind of proactively look for other trial opportunities. So that's one thing. People just get frustrated. If they're not a fit, then they can feel like you don't care about me because I don't fit for your study. The other piece is, like I mentioned earlier, that lack of clarity, not knowing what the expectations are. If someone shows up to a visit and it's 4 hours long and they weren't expecting that, that's horrific. And even things like just not thinking, what is it like for a person who has no context for clinical research? They've gone to a doctor their whole lives. They've never been to a study site. Making it easy to navigate some of these processes. There was one study where they were getting a lot of no-shows. We found out people couldn't figure out the parking garage. They just didn't understand where they were supposed to go. So we made like a little video and included it as a text. We used Google Maps, someone standing and posed, hey, you're going to go here and then you're going to take a left. And people were like, oh, thank you so much. That really helped. Just thinking, what would it be like as a human to deal with this? And can I make it a little easier for them?
Do you have any processes in place where you can get some form of information from patients as far as the experience that they've had?
We don't hear of challenges so much. We'll get people commenting on ads that we run and saying, I filled out this form 3 days ago and no one ever called me. So I think there's more this sense of there's a lack of visibility. It can feel like you're firing your information off into the void and you don't know what's happening. For us, just a lack of communication is a challenge that patients deal with, either lack of clarity or just not hearing anything back at all and feeling like, do I matter? But in terms of the ability to find a study or what happens once someone is on a protocol, we're not getting that feedback directly. Typically, we'll connect people to study opportunities and then the sites themselves are the ones who are kind of handling that relationship from there on out.
In that example in the parking garage, how did you learn about the root cause of that?
There's a couple different ways that patient recruitment companies function. Some of them will just do like a standard ad agency and they'll just say it's X amount of dollars per month and we'll do some advertising and you get what you get. One historic model has been pay per referral. I think that's the most easy to abuse because if I find a bunch of people to fill out a form the right way, then I've given you referrals. It's very easy to abuse. Not that everyone's evil, but some are. So we have to account for the human conditions. We really only invoice when someone gets involved in a study. So either they're consenting or randomizing it. So for that reason, it's really commercially important for us to understand all the way through, like what's going on, are there gaps? And so when we noticed, hey, we've referred quite a few people and you said you're scheduling these appointments, but we haven't seen anyone consent into the study. What's happening? They were like, we're getting a lot of no-shows. And so we reached out to patients and they were like, oh, I couldn't find the parking. And so we just solved it. For us, it's 2 steps. It's having visibility into every step of the patient journey. They raised their hand and said, I'm interested. And now we have, a name in a spreadsheet. That's not really that hard to generate. A lot of people can get names on spreadsheets, but it's connecting them to the study. Are they being called? Are we getting in touch with them? A lot of folks have a 3 phone call and then they're lost policy still, which I haven't picked up my phone since the late 90s. I don't know about you. Having visibility into every step and then having a motivation to care. If I'm just getting paid by referrals, I don't care if people are no-showing. I don't care if you can't get in touch with them. For sponsors or for people who are hiring vendors, make sure that they have an incentive to be a partner all the way through to someone participating in a study.
And it sounds like that could be a major waste of money if you're not careful.
Absolutely. And it also ticks off sites. I think when I first got into the industry, I was like, oh, so we're really helpful. We're like a site's best friend because we're sending all these people who could be a part of the study. And then I found out very quickly that sites are like ambivalent at best towards centralized recruitment companies. And it was shocking to me. And as I started talking to more people, I understood that there's just this long history of like, here's a spreadsheet with 200 names. 190 of them are just going to produce infinite rings because they're not picking up. The other 10 are totally unqualified for the study. Enjoy. And if you don't call them all, the sponsor will yell at you. Whoa, I wasn't anticipating that. So we quickly learned that we had to be able to walk the walk in terms of feeling like a partner to research sites and not someone who's being sent in because they didn't do their job.
I can provide testimony to that as well. Sponsor says, we're going to use this centralized recruiter. And what they do is they say, give us access to your EMR. And they pull a patient list that we could have pulled ourselves, put their name on it, give it to us and say, call these people, and then build a sponsor. We literally just have to do double the work. It's bad.
It's good work if you can get it. We're trying to be the flip side of the coin, really. You have a list of people that you know might be a good fit. We're trying to find folks that you don't know, get them to raise their hand, and then refer them to you. So far, it's been pretty good. I don't think we have any enemies, at least.
What do you feel like we as a clinical research industry are doing correctly to create positive patient experiences?
When I first started was at the crest of the patient centricity as buzzword phase, and it's kind of been slowly replaced by diversity and AI as the conference topics du jour. Beneath the buzzwordiness was a real concern that, hey, maybe people matter. And if you treat them like they matter, you're going to have better outcomes. There's at least a lot of people thinking about solving for the patient experience. And I've seen just tons and tons of folks, from sponsors and CROs to individual sites, putting out either LinkedIn posts or content or conference talks about what we can do to be human, whether it's sending a post study like, thank you for participating in this study, letter or medal or whatever, just acknowledging someone's contribution, that they didn't have to do that and it took some time. I think there's a lot of conversations going on about compensating people for their time and realizing that it is a sacrifice. Yes, you're potentially getting access to a novel therapy, but yes, half the people are on placebos. If they're going to skip work or find a babysitter, give them some money. That is one of the ways we communicate value in our culture. Also, people need money to live. It's a can of worms, especially for such a fierce site advocate. Some of the technologies that enable decentralized studies, I think, are really meaningful to patients. I don't think that means, hey, fully remote study in a box with an automated AI-powered clinical trial coordinator. The idea that instead of driving to the site 10 times, maybe I only have to do it 4, and I can just talk to someone from my house a couple of times, that's meaningful. And I think that that really does unlock participation for some people who otherwise wouldn't. I know that there was a recent very high-profile miss around mobile clinical research sites, and there's definitely cause for pause with respect to kind of regulations and safety. But my wife is a nurse practitioner, and she drove a mobile nursing unit here in Orlando, a giant converted camper, and she went to 3 different locations a week and alternated. She saw people for HIV care who wouldn't get access to care otherwise. She was treating folks who were in the sex industry and just folks who were outside of city limits and didn't have transportation. And that was highly, highly effective. She cared for people and was keeping people on regimens for antiretrovirals so otherwise wouldn't have had it. So I know that mobile medical care is a functional thing, and I have to believe that translating that into a research environment is possible. I know there's a lot of people trying it. I don't know if anyone has necessarily unlocked it yet. I still think that that's a viable approach to kind of making this an option for more people.
I think you're right. That is one direction that this industry is going that I'm very excited about.
And it's tough to separate how much of this is I'm really thinking about patients and I want to give them an option, and how much of this is I have a technology and I'm trying to shoehorn it into the industry with the biggest budgets, which is pharmaceuticals, and I am selling you vaporware or whatever. Not for me to decide. I'm not in procurement. It's sometimes tough to know which is which. I'm hopeful that the folks who are really trying to make a difference for patients and for science will win out and not the charlatans.
On an industry level, we have heard some patients say, I'm having a hard time getting into this trial. And at the same time, we have the sponsors on the other side saying, we can't get enough enrollment for these trials. There's just patients just aren't there. Why do you think we're experiencing recruitment challenges versus poor patient experiences?
There's probably a multifaceted answer, or there are answers that are true for some scenarios and not for others. I've noticed inclusion criteria becoming a little bit more strict and specific. Instead of looking for a patient, they're looking for a left-handed patient who is a Virgo who has 12 years of experience in nuclear physics. If we're looking for people who are so specific that they might not exist, that's part of the problem. We're trying to control for so many variables that we end up weeding out everyone who exists. In other instances, I think there's just a gap in awareness on 2 fronts for patients. One, a lot of them are not aware that studies exist for their condition, or they might be aware of one study but not not another one that would be a good fit. I think that's less the case in rare and oncology. Those folks are generally pretty tuned in, especially if they're connected to patient advocacy groups who are almost always just flush with every opportunity. They're very aware and they're very on top of the ball. The other piece is maybe awareness of clinical research as a care option. I want to use care like in air quotes. I know there's an ongoing debate about whether or not you can call it care. Thinking through, is this a good idea for me? Would this be a logical next step or something that is mutually beneficial? Am I doing a favor for some pharmaceutical company, or is this kind of a win-win? For us, we try to frame it as a win-win. Not that it's completely risk-free, but the upside outweighs the downside for you and for science as a whole. Closing that gap and suggesting that clinical trials are a benefit to people, not just a benefit to the sponsor of the study. And then, raising the overall awareness of studies, I think, is a big piece of that. And the other is maybe just kind of deciding really what's necessary. Like we had a call just this week with a sponsor, and we do a little pre-campaign before we ever work on anything to make sure we don't overpromise. So we'll run ads in the field to a patient population and say, hey, would you be interested in clinical research? And then we'll ask them a couple of questions that align with the IE. And so when we reported back to the sponsor, we said, hey, 20% of the people we talked to disqualified because of this criteria. And we're just wondering how necessary that is. And they were like, oh, it's not necessary. It's a holdover from a different protocol. We could probably relax that one. If we didn't say something just now, would you have just rolled with it and excluded 20% of the people? And so stuff like that exists, I'm sure, at scale, probably is worth revisiting.
The scientists at a sponsor, they'll write this protocol, and they'll try to write this protocol to be a controlled environment similar to the rats that they work with or the mice. And you look at that and you say, this would never fly in the real world. This is not clinically relevant. You can't control every variable when you're in clinical research like you can with your lab rats or your lab mice. You have to have a clinician review these IE criteria. That way you can have a complete understanding of it if it would actually work. On the other side, it's the same thing. I feel the same way. Here in rural America, people don't even consider research. They think it's for very, very sick people, or you're going to turn into an orange-skinned small person. The awareness that research is out there just as an opportunity so that you can be a part of something. I think it's still very rare in the society as a whole to consider that. Sometimes I feel like patients look at research as a level of desperation when it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't necessarily know how to solve that. I mean, there's the idea of what if we all banded together and just did a push for public service announcements around research? And I'm not sure that's the answer. I'm kind of a believer in that groundswell effort dating back to my e-commerce days. If someone had a great experience with a product, they're going to be an advocate of that product down the road. Shout out to CNS Healthcare, which is a site here in Orlando. I had a great experience. I was in a flu vaccine study for them. I think I might have been their top referrer. I sent 6 of my friends and family into the study because I was like, hey, you're either going to get an experimental flu vaccine or you're going to get the standard one. They're going to pay you for your time and maybe we'll create a better flu vaccine. A bunch of my friends and family just went and did it. I'm a special case because I tend to be evangelistic about the things I think are cool, whether that's like a TV show or a flu vaccine study. Having people who have positive experiences, like really positive experiences, not I just went in and they didn't inject a needle into my eye and I didn't grow a third arm. They were really nice. And there was Wi-Fi in the lounge and they gave me snacks and I got paid and the doctor was really kind and I got the time of day from him instead of just they looked at me and like poked me and then left. That kind of creates some referral momentum, I think, so that the next time their friend is considering a study and they're like, oh, you had a good experience, I'll consider it.
If I were to hand you the microphone right now and I just said, what would you like to tell the audience about positive patient experiences and how we can help the industry to enhance recruitment, enrollment, and patient retention, what would you tell them?
I would say for every aspect of the patient experience, from their first interaction with study messaging all the way down to how many visits they're going to have and what is the content of each visit and what data you're trying to collect. It's worth asking yourself, would I do this? And if I was doing it, would it make sense to me? I think that simple step back of, is this unreasonable? If a patient's going to get into the study, how are they going to do it? And then every step of the way, am I asking something unreasonable of them that I wouldn't do myself or wouldn't recommend to my family member because we want extra data or because we want it to be really controlled clinically? I really think that simple rubric would save us some trouble.
Putting yourself in the patient's shoes, it makes total sense. And the while you're at it of clinical trials are happening right now. All of the, well, while you're doing this, why don't you collect that or this or that? And before you know it, patients end up with this really big, long visit that they're not compensated adequately. Steve, thank you so much for coming on to CRP and Central. A true pleasure. I look forward to sharing this with the audience.
I'm really stoked. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, we'll catch you later.
All right, cheers.
Bye. Steve has not only participated in clinical trials, but he also has a diverse background in ministry, classroom education, e-commerce, and now centralized trial recruitment. He had positive participant experiences during his trials. However, at times, patients either do not know the outcomes of their trials or they have no idea why they didn't qualify for trials in the first place. As a result, they feel frustrated and abandoned by what they perceive to be an uncaring industry. Clinical trials are not just for very sick people, and some patients simply may not be aware of the opportunities in their communities. People matter, and patient centricity is by far one of the best directions of this industry. And to follow this path, we must continue to consider the experiences from our patients' shoes. Sponsors are likely experiencing trial enrollment challenges not because the patients don't exist, but rather because their inclusion and exclusion criteria are so specific that it is impossible for the patients to enroll. Clinical trials may be a win-win situation for everyone if we avoid the while you're at it, we consider the patient perspective, and we provide such a positive experience that the same patients we serve will refer and advocate research to their communities. Bree has worked as a nurse and a leader across the industry, from sites and departments to research centers and now into technology. She is witnessing firsthand her mother-in-law navigating the patient journey with true eye-opening experiences. It's 2023, and even now we have patients living in clinical research deserts where it's almost impossible to get a biopsy, much less a contact to an appropriate clinical research site. Once identified, the research centers that can help can take weeks to respond. Trial participants have to be in the right place at the right time. They are suffering as they navigate inefficient processes. They often have to endure a silent loneliness and be their own advocates in a society that does not quite accommodate their needs. And far too often, they must cross state lines just to access not so modern consumer-like experiences with stapled reams of paper and organized folders. Sites, sponsors, CROs, and this industry as a whole absolutely love our patients. We are empathetic and we truly care for their well-being. However, clinical trials are far too complicated to execute at the site, and if we successfully integrate clinical trials into the healthcare in our communities, we could truly open access for our patients and enhance research overall. We must work toward universal industry standards and move beyond our organizational snowflake expectations. And although slow, sponsors are starting to listen, and long-term and permanent change is in the works. To be a better patient advocate, put yourself in the shoes of those you serve and let those emotions wash over you for a level of empathy and understanding. Both interviewers agreed patients in the community are not aware of clinical trials. They also agree that we as an industry are strongly patient-centric and that putting ourselves in the perspectives of those we serve is an excellent way to enhance performance and care. And while Bree feels that limited care integration is a challenge for research complexity, and Steve experienced streamlined processes as soon as sites communicated properly, both share similar views with overcomplicated trial processes at the site level and protocols that are not looking for impossible patients. So, how can we create positive patient outreach experiences to enhance study enrollment and improve the overall experiences of our clinical trial participants? Although different different in perspectives, roles, and experiences, our guests' answers aligned remarkably. We must clearly address communication, access, and complexity. Create a society that actively engages with our community about research. Offer clinical research as an integration into care with the physicians our patients know and trust. Don't make research so impossible to perform or to get into. And above all, put yourself in the shoes of the same individuals that we are trying to help. You never know. That same journey that they are making right now may be forging a better future for future patients to come. And that future patient may, in fact, be you. Thank you for tuning in to today's special episode. Our trial participants are by far the most important component of this complex industry. And remember, we are all going to be patients in the end. Thank you to Bree and Steve for sharing their stories today. Thank you to my community voice volunteers, Peter, Fredette, and Viljena Trask, for helping to introduce today's episode. Finally, thank you to my CRP and sponsors for helping to make this episode possible. A reminder, please join our Voice of Change as a participant or as a sponsor at the Save Our Sites Conference, February 2nd, 2024, Tucson, Arizona. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on CRPN Central.